Welcome to Her Success Matters, a podcast exploring how advisors can work together to build a pathway for women to succeed in financial services. I am your host, Christine Shaw, Chief Executive Officer of Investment News. This podcast will give you rare insider access to the top financial services executives who are taking action to break down the barriers for the next generation of female advisors. You will also hear from some amazing and inspiring women who have forged their own pathway to success. Welcome to Her Success Matters. I'm excited to introduce a very special guest for this episode who is sharing her journey as a trailblazing woman of color in financial services. With us is Kristi Rodriguez, Senior Vice President of Nationwide Retirement Institute. At Nationwide, Kristi leads teams responsible for educating members, partners, and industry leaders on issues impacting their ability to have a secure financial future. Through timely insights, education, and research, Kristi and her teams are helping increase awareness of complex financial topics such as retirement income planning, healthcare, and Social Security. Kristi, I am thrilled to have you with us here today. Welcome to Her Success Matters.
Thank you, Christine. Glad to be here.
So let's start our conversation today by telling our listeners just a little bit more about you and your background.
Sure. So I'm a 20 plus year professional, and the majority of my career actually was spent in healthcare. I was in the health insurance side for the approximately first 16 years of my career, and then made a transition over to financial services in the past 6 years. So really had a great opportunity to understand, how to create well-being from a health perspective and a financial perspective for individuals in our country.
So thank you for telling us about your background, Kristi. And I will tell our listeners too, I apologize if there's a slight noise in the background. We have a little bit of construction going on. But before we even get into your career, let's talk about your education and what it was like attending an historically Black college or university and how that shaped who you are today.
For sure. Attending a historically Black college and university, and the college I attended was Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia, was nothing short than magical. My family and I had actually moved during my 11th grade year, and I moved into a district that was predominantly white. And just really at the time, this is the early 90s, had this sense and this awakening of, wanting to be around more individuals that look like me to quite honestly fit in. One of the contributing factors of deciding to go to Hampton was the show, a popular show in the early 90s called A Different World. And when I saw that show and I saw, African-American students getting educated and having a great time, I knew that was the path for me. But what I didn't know, all the great times that I had at Hampton, all the friendships that I cultivated and even still have now today, just how much they were going to instill in me. And part of what they instilled in me was really being my authentic self and finding a way to have my voice. And knowing that although I was in an environment that was, somewhat homogeneous of being 98% Black, all of us were unique. And what I appreciate is the way that the professors not only poured into me academically, but really helped me cultivate my whole self as a Black woman, to be unapologetic and really proud of who I was. So Hampton, I give a lot of credit and a tribute to a lot of who I am today and feeling comfortable and being comfortable in any room, knowing that I can compete, being my authentic self.
Well, first of all, I love that you used the word magical to describe that experience and that you were able to be your authentic self. And it's a fascinating story to me because then as you navigated into your career, especially finance, that confidence in what you learned there had to play a role into coming into financial services because there aren't a lot of people of color, let alone women of color. And that, that had to take a lot of confidence. And, tell us how you ended up going into financial services and what that experience has been like.
Sure. So originally my major, Christine, was marketing.
Oh,
And
interesting.
very interesting. And my late father told me something when I was approaching my sophomore year and selecting a major. He said, Kristi, if you go into business, pick finance. That way you'll always know how the money is made, and you will be much more of an asset to the organization and to yourself. And so I really appreciated him heeding those words, because he said, marketing is innate. You can always do that. But he said, really understand how business is ran. And so you're absolutely right. So I selected finance as my major. And what I did not anticipate was, coming into an environment of the breadth of financial services. I thought upon graduating from college, probably like most young adults, that there was really one path. At the time, it was either you're going into investment banking or you were working in some type of banking back office. And that was the first career that I selected, was working for a large banking institution that was located in New Jersey, being a credit risk analyst, fresh out of college, which was nothing like I anticipated, nor did it match, now that I reflect back, my personalities and my core strengths.
It's interesting because you talk about your late dad giving you that advice, and it's wonderful that came from a parent. It does that whole, your parents are always right, right? It brings that true, because I know you have a family as well. But it is fascinating and fantastic that you had your dad to give you that, because I think a lot of us look back to our childhood and it's always something like that that really helps you to figure out what to do, the paths to take and all that. And you probably didn't even realize the impact or what that would have on your life until now as you think back. So that's amazing.
It is. And Christine, I'll say, if my daughters listen to this podcast, you hit it right on the money. The parents are always
right. Exactly. Always listen to your parents. It's funny. I'll share a little story with you. So this podcast started out as a way for me to connect with the C-suite and understand more about allyship. And I was going to do like 6 to 8 series of this podcast. And here we are, a year later, with amazing guests, and it's grown into something bigger than I ever did. And when I was young, my mother used to say to me, "You're like Barbara Walters. You're so curious. You always like to ask questions. You should be like an interviewer." And I'm like, and this is actually, I love doing it. So yes, parents are always right. Listen to your parents. If
awesome.
Yeah.
She planted the seed. That was
exactly.
Fantastic.
And here I am. It's also never too late, because I'm in my 50s now doing this and loving it. So then let's talk about, you stepped away from finance and pursued your passion from healthcare. So tell us a little bit about that, and how did that change influence like your career trajectory and why and where you are now?
Yeah, great question. So, just a little bit back into the career that I first had, being a credit risk analyst coming out of college. And again, it was not necessarily the financial service career that was a good fit for me and my personality. And so I quickly decided to make a pivot. Once I knew in my early 20s that I was miserable on Friday evenings, anticipating I'd have to go back to the office on Monday, I knew I had to make a change. And so what I went back to is, again, something else that I learned at Hampton, and a lot of historically Black colleges and universities teach you this, is the power of giving back. And it was always something, again, that my parents instilled. And so I was deeply searching for an industry that would allow me to help individuals live healthier lives. And that is literally how I fell into healthcare. And what I loved is it was the business side of healthcare, but it also gave me that feeling around being philanthropic and feeding into the passion. And what I'll share with you, Christine, is that my career was like none other in healthcare. I literally applied for one position when I first came in. It was at the lowest level that someone could, come in as an entry point, being in sales support, and literally navigated my way into joining their marketing organization. Again, going to something I was innate to. Building a partnership with a nonprofit that we had at the time at United Health Group between YMCAs throughout the country and pharmacies. And then I was tapped into something that was extremely interesting, that it really assisted me, I believe, into my pivot into financial services. So back in 2008, at the time, President Barack Obama had signed the Affordable Care Act, and they were looking to build a team that would help facilitate implementing those provisions into the business. And that is when my eyes just awakened to the impact that this was having, the grappling that this was having with individuals financially that weren't protected under insurance, but also the ones that were, and how we needed to equip. And that was the first time I realized that I could pair my business acumen with a social cause that I was deeply passionate about. And so I continued with another healthcare company for about 3 or 4 years after that. But it was always in these positions. I was uniquely set up and always tapped to either lead large scale launches or lead opportunities to, help implement change or reduce cost. And so, fast forward a little bit, my family and I moved to Columbus, Ohio. And then that's when I met a lot of individuals who work for Nationwide and began to network and realize just how much of a parallel healthcare and helping individuals live healthier lives played into the role of financial services, particularly in our retirement plans business, which is where I initially joined at Nationwide. And to me, I talked about this a little bit earlier, that conversion of health and wealth was so powerful. And I saw the impact of understanding what individuals needed to do to solidify their healthcare now and how they plan for the future with Medicare. And then pairing that when I joined Nationwide to understanding, what are those costs and how do you help marry the two to really ensure that everyone is able to age with dignity.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating because I think that we categorically separate those two topics, but they're so joined at the hip. And the work that you're doing at Nationwide, it's so important because the best laid plans can be so derailed by health issues, and they may not even be your own. It could be your parents, it could be a child. I have a really good friend whose 7-year-old son was diagnosed with a very rare brain tumor, and it's inoperable and incurable. And so, and you think about it throughout all facets of your life. And so it's great that you're doing that kind of work, and Nationwide has products and services, and that you've been able to bring your passions and your purpose all together in this role. I love it.
Absolutely. And I would just add to that is that, the entry point into Nationwide was me only working with our retirement solutions business. But now I have the great opportunity of leading the Nationwide Retirement Institute, as you mentioned earlier, and supporting not only Nationwide Financial with our annuities, our life, and our mutual fund business and corporate solutions, but also thinking about how do we elevate the enterprise? Because you hit on something that's spot on. No one looks at their life in one silo. We are all complex, multidimensional individuals. And just to be able to, you know, launch the discussion to have individuals think about their whole selves and how they see their whole selves in the future is really what my team and I are focused on. And I couldn't be more passionate about what I do. I say this all the time. This is the first job where I truly love, and I just feel like I'm bringing my whole self and all of my energy every day, knowing that I'm having an impact on lives. And that's, to me, there's no other noble cause than to wake up every day and have that responsibility.
And it comes through, by the way. I remember the first time we met, as we were talking about earlier, the energy you bring into a room is just amazing. And that comes when you're really feeling fulfilled. And it's interesting because I think that we talk about it at our Women Advisor Summit, especially in this pandemic, like the importance of self care as well, particularly for women who are balancing careers and, the health, your health and planning for your health and retirement has to be a priority or nothing else works. So it's fantastic you get to do this for a living.
Oh,
So
and you
Chris,
hit it. Yeah, that's so good, Kristi. Because I just
yes,
want to touch on that for a moment.
yeah,
Is that,
please do.
the first, I know they always say you have to put on your mask first before assisting others. And to me, the way that I'm also able to show up every day is I do take that time. And if there's any female listeners out there, we have to feed ourselves and we have to, really equip ourselves so we can be the best for not only our families and our careers, but just holistically as individuals.
Absolutely. There's no badge of honor to wear when you're burnt out and stressed and not feeling good. It just doesn't work. So I'm glad we touched upon that. And let's talk about your leadership. So I know that you obviously exude the happiness and energy that comes from doing what you love. Tell us about how your diverse leadership qualities have helped you in your role and removing unconscious bias and developing teams.
Sure. So, the first thing that I'm so fortunate. I just want to pull that out that I work for a company that has an amazing culture. I don't take that for granted because I remember when there were times where I did not. And so for me, it's easy for me to live my passion and what I'm, definitely focused on because I'm in a culture like that. And so what I like to do is cast that as a shadow of a leader. If I know that I'm working for an organization that is allowing me, definitely to lead in this capacity, then it's my responsibility when I'm building a diverse team to remove these biases is to create a culture of conversation, to create a celebration of belonging that no matter who you are, your voice at the table matters. And I constantly will check in with my team and say, what do you think? What are we missing? What don't I see from my perspective? Because and it's numerous studies, and I know you know this well, that diverse teams outperform and they
Mhm.
are certainly more innovative and creative. And some of my best findings, I have individuals on my team that are from generations of boomers, late boomers, all the way to, very young millennials, and each of their voice counts. And it's about creating that environment to say, hey, no one is wearing titles at the table, but let's really think what is the best outcome. And so I hope that, I'm able to demonstrate that. And then the other way that I do it, to be quite honest with you, is I know those are things that could be a little bit more what folks will call fluffy, is I measure. So I measure, what are the things that we saw come in, and I reward that behavior that I want to, one, demonstrate, but I also want to see continue. And so that is really, to me, the leadership qualities. It's about, ensuring everyone, not only saying a diverse team is not good enough, it's about making sure everyone feels that they belong and that they have a voice, and then continuing to create a culture around having those open, honest, trusting conversations with the team.
Actually, I love that you said it like that in terms of trusting conversations because a lot of people think of these conversations as uncomfortable, and they can be. In fact, when I was on my conversation back in October, someone had said, "Well, these are uncomfortable," and I said, "I actually have a biracial family. Like my brother's married to a Black woman. We have biracial, my niece and nephew, etc." And so we've been having conversations around color for years, but you still don't realize that it's uncomfortable sometimes for people who haven't had that experience, but you have to be able to have a trusting environment or you're not going to create change, and I've learned that a lot in my own journey through this podcast and interviewing and speaking, having conversations with women like you, women like Danielle Burns, Melody Hobson, and, Tiffany Gray. It's like, it's really important that as leaders, we create pathways, we create conversations and plans of action. And I think that's where the trust comes in. If the trust will come when they actually see change and that we allow ourselves to establish programs and protocols and things that can actually shift behavior and say that it's not okay to not have an inclusive environment.
You hit it so far on the nail. And one of the things that, after the unfortunate event of George Floyd, we had John Carter, my leader, really opened up the conversation for us to have that open, honest, trusting conversation. And, the piece that I always go back to is giving grace. So again, that goes back to we all come in the room with some degree of unconscious bias, but if we truly give each other grace and we're open and receptive, that's where the change happens. And it was uncomfortable for me because I talked about in that setting. This was the first time I've really had to address my duality. I usually would check that kind of at the door and come in and do the job that I have to do, and so it also made me vulnerable, and it allowed me to open myself up and be amongst not only my direct reports in a trusting way, but also the peers that I serve alongside with. So you're right, you cannot understate the importance of having the conversation and giving each other grace as we continue to build trust.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Kristi, because too, I also don't think I realize the importance and opportunity being a white woman with a platform that it's my responsibility too. And I think what I've learned too is a lot of Black people and especially Black women in these types of industries, everyone leans to them and says, okay, it's your job to help us do this. It's actually all of our responsibilities. And even as recent as a couple of months ago, I had someone say, well, what if people don't want diversity, equity, and inclusion training? I'm like, well, then they should find a new job because we're not going to tolerate, like, that's just not how it can be. And more leaders have to say, like, this has to change. We cannot accept the status quo if we're going to make progress. So I love that.
And
Yeah.
thank you for being an ally. That is much appreciated.
Oh, I love it. It's enlightened me in so many ways and changed me in so many ways. So I think ultimately we all, regardless of who we are, where we came from, you have to be opening to hearing, listening, and learning. You just have to be. And that we all do better as a society when that happens. So let's talk about you talked about Nationwide, your environment. Could you tell us some of the specific research that you're working on within Nationwide to help highlight gender and racial wealth gaps?
Sure. And so Nationwide has a long history of really being at the forefront of DE&I. And so what I'm just excited about is, as an extension to our great leader at the helm of building the culture, Gail V. King, who's our EVP of HR, is that, I'm now able from a business side to launch research that's really going to embark on improving the lives of diverse markets. And so Christine, there are really 5 diverse markets that we're focused on within Nationwide Financial that we are going to the marketplace with. We started off with our Black market segment, and I'll share a little bit about that research in a moment that's already concluded. We're in the process of doing research around Latinx and LGBTQ+, and then we're going to round out in the next year or so research around our Asian market population as well as rural. So we really did not want to take this kind of peanut butter spread approach that, all these diverse groups are the same, but really dig deep. And so in 2018, this is when it actually started, we embarked on some research, and the acronym is RISE, and that research stands for Recruit, Invest, Sustain, and Evolve. And that proprietary research, Christine, focused on looking at the lack of representation of Black Americans in financial services, specifically advisors, but we did expand it out to financial professionals. And it looked at those individuals at the undergraduate level. And so there were 22 historically Black colleges and universities that were part of this research. And then we also looked at individuals who were actually working in the industry as financial advisors. And just a couple of startling pieces that I'll share with you of that research that really got us to galvanize and create an initiative was that 90% of those African American students that we surveyed in undergrad said that they had not thought about or would not pursue a career in financial services because they perceived they would have discrimination on the part of their race or ethnicity.
Wow, 90%.
And it doesn't get much better on the individuals who are actually working. Over 80% said they thought their race or ethnicity got in their way of and the inability to create a national market, to get mentorship and sponsorship. And so, that was the first huge chunk of, wow, this lack of representation had a lot to do with not seeing individuals that look like them and not feeling like they had the support they needed. But the other piece that really drove out of the research that we got excited about is, these individuals felt like if we did have this and we had the support, this would allow us to create wealth in Black and underserved communities. And so, Nationwide, again, embarked on this research in 2018. We didn't conclude until the end of 2019. And really thought this is something that we needed to act upon to really be an industry leader and a voice at the table to make sure and to ensure there was change. And so with that research, Christine, we decided to launch an initiative called FAIR. And you can see we love acronyms.
Yes.
That acronym stands for Financial Alliance for Racial Equity, where we partner with 6 of those historically Black colleges and universities and a number of industry firms, such as, to just name a few, Morgan Stanley, Huntington Bank, NFP, M Financial, and Ebury, who is another industry leader, to say, how can we come together? Nationwide as a provider, academia, and these large financial services firms and industry partners to say, what can we do based on this research to drive change? And I'm so excited. We launched last year. We already have 3 work streams where we've established a mission and short-term and long-term goals to really talk about how we're going to tackle systemic change to really drive creating opportunities for representation of Black Americans in financial services, but more importantly, indirectly, how are we going to build wealth in these communities that desperately need it?
So, Kristi, the point about all this that I think a lot of people don't realize is that if we advance and we get more people of color or in diverse, underserved communities into the workforce, and then they start to earn money and they don't have access to financial advisors who look like them and can understand them and help them with their plan, then it creates this ongoing wealth gap. So by doing the work you're doing and focusing to try to encourage and create pathways for people of diverse populations to come into financial services, we can help make so much change and help people understand how to plan for their financial success and future. And it's so critical to be able to do that. So I love that Nationwide is doing that work. And I do look forward to a day where at universities and at young age, we can encourage more people of underserved communities and diverse backgrounds to come into this industry and help become, part of the financial solution.
I think that's so wonderful that you say that. And it is a game changer. And what I appreciate more and why we expanded it to be beyond advisors is that there's so many tracks in financial services. There's so much opportunity. And to your point, even, to come in and just understand how to build wealth is so keenly important. And I look at this as more than just an opportunity for Black America. When you lift individuals and give them mechanisms to create wealth the same way we did when many of us came, American and immigrants came into this country, it only builds all of us. And so to me, I look at this as being, a global opportunity. I know we're focused now on one segment, but I see this really being the tenets and the tentacles we need to create wealth and to continue to build our country.
I couldn't agree more. And as you've alluded to, the research you're doing, the research we have available over and over tells us that by taking actions like this, we have a better outcome for everyone. So we all win. A richer economy, a healthier financial economy, and healthier people is what fuels economic growth worldwide. There's no disputing those facts. So this is fantastic
Not at all.
work.
Yeah, not at all. Absolutely.
Well, this has been really a fantastic conversation, not only to learn more about you, your background, and your experience as a young woman, and then how you took that into your career, but also to the programs and the research that Nationwide is doing. So we look forward to future outcomes of your research and sharing the information you learn. And please, continue to do that with us here at Investment News and all forums. But to tell our listeners how they can follow you on social media or follow Nationwide.
Sure. You can follow Nationwide on Instagram, Nationwide. You can follow us on Facebook, as well as Twitter. And you can reach out and follow me directly on LinkedIn at Kristi Rodriguez, and in parentheses, it's Martin.
Great. I know that a lot of our listeners will want to do that because the information you're sharing is very insightful. Not to mention that we all also learned and validated what we know is your parents are always right. So every
Absolutely.
successful woman should forward this to their young family and make them listen to that and say, see? So Kristi, my final question that I ask all of my guests is to please tell us in your words why you believe her success matters.
I love this question. I believe her success matters because when she's successful, her family's successful, her community's successful, the nation is successful. And finally, her success matters because the world becomes successful as a result of it.
I love that answer. Just recently in recognition of International Women's Day and Women's History Month, we put a montage together of some of the answers. And the way you just broke it down, it's about giving back and passing on, which is no surprise because you talked about that early on in the podcast, that you really believed in that. And that comes out so true in the answer to that question. So thank you for that and sharing. And again, thank you for your time. This was another amazing conversation where I've learned a lot, and I appreciate everything you're doing at Nationwide and giving back to communities.
Thank you so much, Christine. I thoroughly enjoyed myself.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Her Success Matters. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available, and share this podcast with others that believe her success matters.
The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Investment News. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service providers with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.